A speech by William P Powell, Abolitionist, published in the Liberator, October 18th, 1861. The speaker addressed a recent essay noting that slavery had become morally and ethically understood in the U.S. as Negro slavery. In this sense, only one form of slavery was right, and any other form of slavery was considered wrong. The government could then condone enslaving one segment of humanity and denounce and abhor enslaving any other. If slavery was admissible, he argued, then enslaving white people should be admissible as well. He also addressed the current conception that slaves were content in their condition. Fellow citizens, it is with no small degree of pleasure we give our consent to preside over the deliberations of this patriotic assembly because we believe that it is the duty of every citizen of whatever complexion, however humble, to throw the whole weight of his influence on the side of the government under which he lives, because notwithstanding the invidious distinctions so prevalent all over the country against our race, for no color of crime, but for the crime of color, we equally feel the burden of our country's trouble in common with our heretofore highly favored fellow countrymen, because the signs of the time clearly indicate that the non-slave owning states are now reaping the bitter fruits of their base servility to the interests of the slave power. Because to use the language of another, if you fasten a chain on the ankle of another, a retributive providence will surely fasten the other end around your own neck. If the doctrine of enforced unrequited labor is a holy thought and wholesome thought, then it is right to enslave white as well as black men. What's good sauce for the goose is most certainly sauce for the gander. If it is right to enslave black men in South Carolina under the U.S. Constitution, then it is right to enslave white laborers in Massachusetts and put them, their wives, and their children on the auction block and sell them to the highest bidder. The Richmond Enquirer thus speaks on this topic. Until recently, the defense of slavery has labored under great difficulties because its apologists, for they were mere apologists, took halfway ground. They confirmed the defense of slavery to mere Negro slavery, giving up the slavery principle and admitting other forms of slavery to be wrong. The line of defense, however, is now changed. The South maintains that slavery is right, natural, and necessary, and does not depend upon differences of complexion. The laws of the slave states sustain the holding of white men in bondage. Ex-Senator Downs of Louisiana thus spoke. He said, "I call upon the opponents of slavery to prove that the white laborers of the North are as happy and as contented, as comfortable as the slaves of the South. In the South, the slaves do not suffer 1/10 of the ills endured by the white laborers of the North. Poverty is unknown to the Southern slaves, for as soon as the masters of slaves become too poor to provide for them, he sells them to the others who can take care of them. This, sir, is one of the excellencies of the system of slavery, and this, the superior condition of the slave over the northern white laborer." Now listen, such, fellow citizens, are declared purposes of the lords of the lash. We, as uncompromising abolitionists, contend that chattel slavery is a violation of man's inherent God-given right, that no system, custom, tradition, usage, precedent framed into law, except for crime, is a justification for the enslavement of any of God's children. The election of Abraham Lincoln to the presidency is only a pretext for secession. The great contest now going on all over the country, disguise it as we may, is between slavery and freedom. Slavery sectional, freedom national. Also, the disintegration of this American Union, now almost divided North and South, the one, by God's blessing, to be forever free, and the other, slave only for a season, till the Negro Goths and Vandals, like the white slaves of classic Rome, wipe out the accursed sin in rivers of blood. Of course, we are all deeply sensible of the existence of this terrible war. Terrible in its brutality as well as destructive in its ravages. The revolution of 1776 was nothing in comparison with this of 1861. Then it was only against duty levied on tea and the Stamp Act, insignificant of themselves, which the colonies successfully resisted. Now, the final struggle is that the South slave states, not satisfied with the pro-slavery guarantees of the U.S. Constitution, which for 82 years has secured them their property in human flesh, now demand greater security for the preservation of Negro slavery. Of the African slave trade shall be legalized all over the American continent by unalterable law forever. Never in the history of our unfortunate country have the stars and stripes been held in greater veneration by abolitionists, even by colored men then, now. For one, I must confess that heretofore I have held in utter contempt the United States flag, because it gave us no protection, and have often explained, in the language of the poet Campbell, United States, your banner wears two emblems, one of fame. Alas, the other that it bears remind us of your shame. The white man's liberty in types stands blazing by your stars. But what's the meaning of your stripes? They mean your Negro scars. But now the stars and stripes, with the exception of 15 slavery stars, which are rapidly approximating to the sun center of the world's political progress and soon to be lost in the immensity of freedom space, never looked more beautiful, more hopeful. It represents, in this fearful crisis, the express will of the free states, the total annihilation of Negro slavery. Fellow citizens, I believe that God's own time, long wished for, has now come. Slavery must come to an end, and that speedily, whether by bloody massacre, exterminating the slave owner, or by peaceful means. God only knows, but by whatever means, in God's name let it come. The great change now witnessed all over the free states is truly encouraging. Pro-slavery flunkeyites, old-line Whigs, Democrats, political abolitionists, Garrisonians, Republicans, disenfranchised colored Americans, and non-residents all vie for with each other in support of the government and look up to the stars and stripes as the John the Baptist of the slaves, coming Redeemer, and will defend it in whatever way their own convictions of duty may dictate, to the bitter end. We regret the necessity which caused this extraordinary, distinctive meeting. It should not be so. It is no fault of ours that we are not this day mixed in this imminent deadly breach. It is no fault of ours that we are not standing shoulder to shoulder in battle array with men of the North to put down the rebellion of the South. It is no fault of ours that we are standing still with folded arms whilst government is straining every nerve in the maintenance of its legitimate constitutional authority. We stand now on the same broad ground of our common humanity, where our fathers stood in 1776 and 1812, and are ready and willing to follow their illustrious patriot example. But why should government stand halting between two opinions? Why hesitate and stoop to pander to the sickly sentimentalities of conscience and the Constitution? If custom makes law, then the past history of this country's struggle fully justifies government calling into active service every muscle, without regard to the texture of the hair which adorns the head, or the color of the cuticle which covers the body. We are not begging this question. Neither do we mean to rummage among the musty pages of history to find a precedent upon which to hang a doubt. Neither do we care for legal or illegal technicalities or constitutional prohibitions. These all sink into insignificance as compared to the fearful exigencies into which the country is now plunged. There is law, a higher law, if you please, a law as old as the Bible. In time of war, there is no law. This law should be more particularly be now enforced to the very letter, because the nation is at war with itself to put down high treason backed up by 800,000 slave-owning rebels against 27,700,000 freemen. And the Constitution authorities. In time of war, there is no law, only the law of superior force. It is only when the rebels are whipped into submission and sue for peace that their sober second thought will be made to obey the powers that be, ordained in the form of physical force. Hence, we advocate this law of necessity because it obviates the slow process of doubtful legislation. Proclaim this law, and 50,000 able-bodied men of our race will not wait to be asked to take up arms to defend the liberties of the country. Proclaim this law of liberty, and 4 million of our race will rise up from the sleep of death and leap into the front ranks of freemen. Proclaim this law of strength, and our country will not present the shameful spectacle to the sneering gaze of the world as being too weak to defend herself without foreign aid. Proclaim this law of retaliation, and we shall have given the rebels in exchange a Roland for an Oliver. Proclaim this law of righteousness, and this afflicted, but we trust, repentant nation will then have vindicated the cause of truth, justice, and liberty. Mr. Powell's remarks were received with considerable applause. October 18th, 1861, William P Powell, Abolitionist, published in the Liberator.